today's episode, I'm going to share some cryptid encounters where the people aren't sure exactly what they came across. The final story of this episode is particularly creepy, as the person who bought a house from someone who was very eager to get rid of the property had some weird things immediately begin to happen once they moved in. But we will start off with a story of something not only chasing a man and his friends in his car, but keeping up with the vehicle while in pursuit. Alright, let's get into today's stories. The first story of this episode comes to us from someone who was chased by something in their car. The original poster, or OP, does not say where exactly his story takes place. He and his friends decided to take his Jeep out to the mountains near where they lived one day to ride the trails. By the time they finished and were on their way back, it was around 2 in the morning. The gravel road they were driving on, going down the mountain, would take them past a private family graveyard. The OP, who was driving, decided to pull over into the graveyard's makeshift parking area right next to the cemetery to mess with his friends. As they were sitting there fooling around, he decided to really mess with them by yelling out. Well, apparently something out there decided to mess with them, as about 5 seconds after he screamed, something in the woods behind the cemetery yelled back. The OP describes his friends and himself as big guys who had various firearms in the Jeep with them. But fear and adrenaline kicked in when they heard the scream, and they all knew it was time to get out of there. The OP quickly started his Jeep and took off speeding down the gravel road. He points out that his Jeep isn't in the best condition, so when he says speeding, he means going about 45 miles an hour down this small mountain road. However, they began hearing something running along beside them when they were about 2 miles from the main road. Whatever was out there and had screamed at them was now chasing their car and keeping pace with it at 45 miles an hour. They could hear the branches snapping in the woods as this thing chased them down. But just as they reached the main road, the sounds of running and branches snapping suddenly stopped. They were able to leave the area without further incident, but never got a look at what yelled at them before chasing them off of that mountain. In response, one commenter shared a story from a letter sent to David Politis about an ex-police officer who was chased on foot by something in a similar manner to how the OP's car was chased in the original story. For those who don't know, David Politis is the author of the Missing 411 books and really brought the disappearances of people from national parks into the spotlight. The people in these stories disappear under strange and mysterious circumstances, with some never to be seen again. The former police officer who rode in to David Politis was out one night and could hear something very large following him. He couldn't see it, but he heard branches and twigs breaking. He finally had enough, pulled his knife, and turned around to say, "Come and get me now." Whatever was following him turned and went in the opposite direction. The commenters on this post believe the OP and his friends encountered either a Bigfoot or a Dogman, with one saying the fact that it was able to keep up with the vehicle is a common occurrence in Dogman stories when people are in their cars. This is true. I've heard stories like these where either a Sasquatch or Dogman chase someone out of the woods where they are encountered, but they do it from inside the tree line off to the side of whoever they are chasing. In some instances, people say they can hear more than one being chasing after them on both sides as they run. I really feel like when I read or hear these stories that the people running from these cryptids are being ushered out of the area where they saw the creatures. Like they don't want the humans there and they scare them to get them to run, and then they follow along inside the tree line just to make sure they leave the area. Otherwise, why wouldn't they come out of the trees and try to attack? Obviously, if they can keep up with vehicles going 45 to 80 miles an hour, which I take directly from the stories I've heard, then they could easily catch people on foot. Just seems to me that they either can't attack, don't want to, and/or are trying to escort people out of their territory. What do you think chased the OP and his friends off that mountain? And why do you think these cryptids chase people out of the woods like they do on occasion? The next story comes from the United Kingdom, with the original poster asking the question, is it possible that there are Wendigo in Europe? The OP does not say where exactly he is from, just that he is British. His encounter took place one evening when he decided to go for a walk through the woods near where he lives. It is a quiet, rather secluded area and a nice place to be on a summer evening in the UK, according to the OP. He mentions that he is very familiar with the woods where he takes his walks and went there a lot when he was younger. He knows that there are no animals larger than a fox living in the area. He was walking through the forest when he noticed the sun was beginning to set. It was around 8 p.m. at the time. He decided to turn around and head back the way he came when he heard an ear-piercing scream that sounded like a woman screaming in anger. It was so loud he froze in place and could not move, but only for a moment. He searched the forest but saw nothing and no one. He is aware that foxes can make some strange noises, and he has heard them scream before, but they sounded nothing like what he just heard. As he was leaving, he saw multiple what he calls oddities among the trees that looked a lot like deer. Except for the fact that there haven't been any deer in those woods for more than 200 years. He quickly realized, though, that this definitely was not a deer. He kept seeing it while walking out of the forest, seemingly following him, lurking just inside the tree line, crouched down with what looked to be like human legs. It also had very bulky arms. The creature was acting like it didn't want the OP to get a good look at it. He thought this because when he stopped to look for more than a few seconds, the creature would retreat into the woods, quickly vanishing from sight. He felt the creature following him until he exited the forest, looking back once more but seeing nothing. It was only after he left the forest that he truly felt like he was alone again. He asks if this could possibly be a Wendigo, although he knows that they are usually only seen in North America and not in Europe. I don't think this was a Wendigo, especially based on the deer-like appearance. This sounds more like a Witchuge, but the only problem is Wendigo and Witchuge are associated with Native American lore, which pertains to North America. The human-like legs and the bulkiness of the creature make me want to think Dogman, as there are a lot of sightings in the UK. But the deer-like appearance throws me off here. I'm not entirely sure what the OP could have seen while walking that night. What do you think he saw? Could it have been a cryptid or something else entirely? The next encounter comes from a poster who saw a dark figure on his property. He does not say where exactly his encounter took place, just that he lives in a rural area that was once farmland before it was reclaimed by the forest. The undergrowth is very dense and full of thorns, vines, and a lot of other things that could be easily tripped over. There is a trail which is the only clear path in the woods, leading through the dense foliage. He walks multiple times a day. He ventures out into the forest to smoke, and there is one spot in particular he likes to stop and mill around about in while smoking before heading back. It is where the trail comes to a dead end about 150 feet or so into the woods. It is his favorite spot that he still visits today. His first trip into the forest is when he first gets up. Sometimes he ventures out to his favorite spot before he has had a chance to fully wake up. The summer morning he saw the dark figure out in those woods started out like any other day. He woke up and began his trek to his spot at around 11 in the morning. He had almost reached the end of the trail when he heard rustling off the path. It was something bipedal and it was moving fast. Curious as to what it could be, he began scanning the trees in front of him when he caught something about 20 feet from him, just beyond where the trail comes to a dead end. It was a large black figure that had begun moving away from him. He is 6 feet tall and says whatever was out there with him was just as tall as him or taller. He turned and took off to his house once he realized what was going on. He dismisses what he saw as a person who was on his land where they weren't supposed to be and took off once they were spotted. He does admit that it would be fun to think that he could have encountered a Sasquatch in his own backyard. However, after his encounter with the strange figure, when he goes into those same woods, a paranoid feeling comes over him and he feels like something is watching him. The feeling, mixed with the sensation of being watched, has made him hyper aware of his surroundings, and he no longer feels like the forest is his. He now questions if it was a person and what they were doing creeping around his land before running off after being caught. This very well could have been someone on the OP's property that wasn't supposed to be there, which would explain why they would run off after being seen. But what makes me question this is how he felt in the woods after the encounter. Being paranoid, not feeling like the woods were his anymore, and the biggest thing, for me at least, feeling like he was being watched. All of this makes me think it wasn't a person, but instead a cryptid. The three things he describes feeling are all usually associated with cryptid encounters and being in the same area as them. I'm thinking he did indeed see either a Sasquatch or a dogman out there behind his house. Given the height of the creature, if it was either a Sasquatch or a dogman, it would have been an adolescent. What do you think he saw? Person, Sasquatch or dogman, or something else? The final story of this episode comes from a poster who recently bought a home in the middle of the woods and has had strange things begin to happen after moving in. The original poster is worried that there might be something sinister near his new home, so he posted his story online in hopes that someone could help him. His newly purchased home is on the border of Ohio and Michigan. He owns 5 acres, but his land is surrounded by more than 600 acres of forest. There is only one other home in the area. He believes that whatever is around his home is possibly a Wendigo or a skinwalker, but he admits to not being knowledgeable on these cryptids, so he turned to the online community hoping he can learn enough to protect his family. Before moving into the home, he noticed some red flags when it came to the home itself and from the sellers, who were selling the home on their own without realtors. The seller of the home was an elderly single woman who had the help of her daughter and son-in-law. The daughter told the OP she had become paranoid living there for more than 20 years and did not leave the home anymore, even though she was still in good health. She also mentioned that her mother never answered the door when someone knocked, and he noticed that there were cameras outside as well as a flashlight in every single room. They were also very eager to sell the home and accepted $60,000 under the asking price. When they had the home inspected, the inspector told them that none of the windows opened and they hadn't for years. The OP didn't think too much of this and chalked it up to the home being built in 1985 and the windows, which were the home's original windows, being old or broken. The inspector also noticed some issues around the house when looking outside due to lack of maintenance. The family selling it told them that it was because the elderly woman living there just didn't like being outside anymore and spent all of her time indoors. During one visit to the house so he could take some measurements, the OP was told by the woman living there about a light on a pole in the yard. She told him that if the light ever went out, to replace it immediately because it was way too dark out there without it. She also told him that he and his family would hear coyotes at night, including right up against the house. She said they liked to gather in a bush near the front porch during winter. At the time, his co-worker lived only 2 counties over from his newly purchased home. When the OP was finalizing the deal for his house, his co-worker was going through a divorce and trying to sell his home. He gave him an Axis deer skull with antlers and said it was given to him when he bought his property and he wanted to now gift it to the OP, suggesting that he hang it outside his house. The OP enjoys hunting and it looked cool to him, so he thought why not. He hung it outside and didn't think anything else about it until recently. Before moving into their new home, the OP and his fiancée began having nightmares that something was trying to possess their newborn son. He has had the dream a few times and his fiancée refuses to tell him about the dream she has been having. This ended his first post with him saying he was concerned that something was going on with the property and asking if he had anything to worry about. He picked up his story in an update written after he, his fiancée, and their newborn son moved into their new home. It had been almost 2 weeks since moving in, and he took some recommendations from commenters about cleansing the home to remove bad vibes. To that point, everything had been great, he says, but there had been some creepy things happening since they moved in. In the 13 days he has lived in the home, he has found bones just outside his door 3 times. The most recent was a deer femur, and it was found outside the door leading to his back deck. Before this, he found a pile of small bones by the door leading to the front porch. This began happening the first few nights after they moved in, with a long bone found in the same spot where he had found the femur by the back door. He didn't think too much of it at first and thought maybe that the bone was left by the previous owner. The second pile he found he attributed to being left by an animal. But after the third time, he finds it weird, especially since they were left by the doors each time. Other strange things have been happening around the property as well. The first is that his motion sensor lights won't turn on. He has changed the bulbs out twice and still cannot get them to work. However, he does chalk this up to faulty wiring. The other thing happening is that he and his fiancée have heard a bizarre sound coming from the forest around their home at night. The OP is an avid hunter and camper, but the noise is something he has never heard before. He describes it as sounding like a loud propeller chopping its way through the woods and sounds as if it could be elevated, but that is hard for him to tell. After it passes through the forest, the animals go crazy. He sees deer running around and hears coyotes howling. They eventually settle down after a few minutes. He ends his update again asking about the sounds and wondering if it is coming from something, quote, out of his league. He says there is something about the property that has him worried. The OP posted his story on the internet thinking it was either a skinwalker or a wendigo, but the behavior demonstrated to this point makes me think either Sasquatch or Dogman. Both like to approach homes and knock, growl, or even look in the windows. However, skinwalkers have been known to come right up to homes too, where wendigos seem to want to lure you out into the woods most of the time. Also, the bones left could be Sasquatch behavior as well. They do like to gift things on occasion and in certain circumstances. Whatever the case is with the bones, I would absolutely not gift anything back. Do not interact with the being or beings. I've heard way too many bad stories where the people gifting to the cryptids stop and terrible things begin to happen. As for the noise they hear, this one has me a bit baffled. The way he says it chops through the trees makes me think it could be a Sasquatch running, but to be loud enough to be mistaken as a propeller? I don't know about that one. And then for all the animals to go crazy like they do, usually when a cryptid is near, there is no other animal activity. He did say it does happen after whatever is making the noise has come and gone, but still, there is usually no animal activity even after a cryptid has seemingly left because they are still close enough by. For him to be an avid hunter and camper and to have never heard the noise, no wonder he is worried. This is a recently posted story, so I will make sure to keep an eye on it for any updates. What do you think is in the forest around his home, and how should he handle it? And that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you'd like to hear more stories like these and other types of cryptids, make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you want to send me your story, I'd love to read it. My email is wolfwhocriedcryptid@gmail.com. I will also put it in the description below. With your permission, I may want to use it in an episode. Even if you'd prefer that I didn't share your story on my channel and just want someone to listen, email me. We can privately talk about your encounter. And please remember to keep it civil in the comments section. No one deserves to be ridiculed whether they believe or not. Thank you for listening. I'll catch you at the next episode.